Hi everyone, and welcome to The Sleepy Scientist. I'm really happy you're here. Tonight, we're going to go on a calm and quiet trip to learn something amazing. So get comfy, take a deep breath, and let's enjoy this peaceful science story together. Before we start, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it for you right now? If you like relaxing science videos, don't forget to tap the like button. Now let's begin. Before bones, before claws, before anything swam with teeth or flew with wings, there was only the ocean, vast and silent, stretching like a cradle of secrets under a sky without birds. The earth then was not the world we know. There were no flowers, no trees, no buzzing insects or roaring mammals. The continents were bare stone, cracked and steaming, and the only breath was that of the sea, slow, deep, and ancient. It was within that breath that life first stirred, not in loud drama, but in quiet bloom. Imagine a ripple, soft as silk, moving through the darkness of a warm, shallow bay. In that ripple, something alive, so small it would escape the eye even today, divided for the first time, not by accident, but with intent. These were the earliest whispers of animals, born not of muscle or mind, but of membranes and motion. They had no mouths, no eyes, no shape we would now recognize, but they moved. That movement was everything. To move is to act upon the world, to search, to flee, to begin the long, slow story of behavior. These earliest beings were not plants, rooted and patient. They were wanderers. The sea, rich in minerals and warmed by volcanic heat, offered both nourishment and mystery. Tiny cells began to work together, sticking side by side, sensing each other, forming clusters that flowed like living lace through the water. In time, these clusters became bodies, not rigid, not armoured, but soft and shifting. They absorbed the world through their skin. They floated. They filtered, they pulsed. These were the first animals, the sponges, the comb jellies, the sea fans of deep time. Their names are strange now, and their fossils rare, but they were the beginning of movement, of sensation, of hunger. Their bodies were simple, but in their simplicity lay profound innovation. Some developed cilia, tiny hairs that beat in unison, propelling them gently forward. Others created water currents to bring in food and sweep out waste. Each adaptation was a quiet experiment, written not in ink but in survival, and as they drifted the ocean began to change, slowly filled with the chemical fingerprints of life. We often think of evolution as a march of strength and complexity, but in the beginning it was about softness. The first animals were soft because the world allowed it. There were no predators yet, no need for armour or escape. It was a time of openness, when existence was an invitation, not a battle. In that softness, the rules of biology were written, how cells communicate, how they divide labour, how they recognise self from mother. These were rules that would echo through every creature that followed, from jellyfish to jaguar. Somewhere in that ancient sea, one group of simple animals began to specialize their cells, not just for motion or feeding, but for signaling. A whisper from one end of the body to the other. This was the birth of the nervous system, fragile but revolutionary. To feel the world, to respond with purpose, to remember what came before, it all began here. Now imagine a shallow lagoon, lit by faint sunlight filtered through microbial haze. The floor is soft with microbial mats, living carpets made of layered bacteria. Upon these mats lie creatures unlike anything alive today. Flat, leaf-like, their bodies etched with fractal patterns. These are the ediacaran animals, soft-bodied beings that absorbed nutrients from the seafloor or captured particles from passing currents. Some looked like ferns, others like quilted discs or feathered ovals. They did not have mouths or stomachs, but they thrived. We find their impressions in sandstone like fossils of forgotten dreams. They were not ancestors to everything we see now, but they were experiments in what life could be. Some of them may have belonged to dead-end branches, entire lineages lost to time, but others laid the groundwork for what would come next. From these early forms came bodies with symmetry, left and right, front and back. This was more than shape, it was direction. An animal with symmetry could have a head, could move with intent, could sense the world in a focused way. Around 541 million years ago, something extraordinary unfolded, the Cambrian explosion. In the blink of geological time, animals with eyes, limbs, shells, and brains appeared in the fossil record. But this explosion did not come from nothing. It was prepared by the quiet innovations of the soft-bodied pioneers who lived for hundreds of millions of years before. Without them, the explosion would have had no fuse to light. Some of the first true animals to leave behind hard parts, preserved for us to find, were the trilobites. These armoured wanderers roamed the seafloor, scanning with compound eyes, feeding on detritus and molting their exoskeletons as they grew. Others built cone-shaped shells or lived in burrows. With shells came fossils, and with fossils came memory. But let us not forget the soft ones. Most left no bones, no teeth, no trace, but they lived. They dreamed in the rhythms of the tide, pulsed in quiet synchronicity with the moon, and built the first networks of life beneath the waves. Their legacy is not in what they left behind, but in what they began. Today, every breath we take, every motion we make, carries an echo of those first animals. The way our cells signal, the way our bodies divide tasks, the way we sense light or respond to touch. All of it began in the ocean's hush, in that primal cradle of movement and flow. We're not separate from those beings. We are a continuation. Their softness gave rise to our strength, their stillness to our thought. Beneath our complexity lies their simplicity, beating still. And so, when we look to the sea and wonder who we were, we're not looking into the past. We're looking into the mirror of our beginnings. Let's drift deeper, not through space but through time, down into the old blue hush of Earth's early oceans, where light struggled to pierce the haze, and the silence was filled not with noise but with the soft stirrings of change. By the time the Ediacaran creatures faded from the world, a new symphony had begun in the watery dark. Life was no longer just floating or absorbing, it was crawling, hunting, sensing. And though we often picture the Cambrian explosion as a sudden burst, it was more like a sunrise, gradual, glowing, unstoppable. The creatures that emerged did not arrive all at once, but one by one, like the notes of a careful melody rising from the deep. They brought with them the first true faces of the animal world, eyes to see, legs to run, shells to protect, and brains to remember. In their tiny bodies, smaller than a coin yet vast in potential, lay the architecture for every animal that would follow. Eyes are among the most remarkable of these ancient innovations. Imagine a creature no bigger than your fingernail, its body fringed with feathery limbs, its gaze scanning the dim seabed, with compound eyes made of dozens of facets. This was a trilobite, and it was not alone. Other creatures too were beginning to perceive the world not just as pressure or heat, but as light and shadow, movement and stillness. The invention of vision reshaped the rules of survival. To see meant to hunt, and to see meant to hide. The arms race had begun. not in malice, but in response. Evolution doesn't choose, it follows. And when one being learned to chase, another learned to flee. Muscles became faster, shells became thicker, minds became sharper. And with each adaptation, the ocean became less a cradle and more a theatre, where each creature played a role written by trial and time. The soft-bodied creatures had not vanished. Many had simply changed. Some developed tiny bristles to crawl along the seafloor. Others grew tiny grasping limbs or long probing tentacles. One group, the ancestors of modern worms, dug through sediment, turning the seafloor from a static mat into a churned and living terrain. Others became early relatives of arthropods with jointed legs and hardened shells. And in one obscure corner of that ancient sea, something extraordinary unfolded. The first chords of the vertebrate lineage. They did not look like us, not yet. These were simple, soft-spined swimmers with rudimentary nerve cords and flexible tails. But inside their tiny bodies, the architecture of a future spine was taking shape. The backbone of all vertebrates, from fish to falcon, from lizard to lion, began here, in darkness, in simplicity, in courage without knowing its name. Burgess Shale, a famous fossil site high in the Canadian Rockies, gives us a rare glimpse into this long-vanished world. Locked in layers of fine sediment are creatures of astonishing variety and elegance. Anomalocaris, with its segmented body and grasping limbs, once ruled these waters as a predator. It had no jaws, no bones, but a mouth like a sanding wheel lined with plates, and eyes that shimmered like gemstones. Opabinia, with its 5 eyes and strange hose-like snout, looks almost imaginary, yet it lived, swam, and searched for food in the mud. Hallucigenia, long thought to be upside down in reconstructions, skittered on spiked legs, its back bristling with spines like a walking dream. These were not mistakes of nature, they were experiments, bold, weird, brilliant. Life was testing the limits of what bodies could be, and as the ocean filled with new forms, it also filled with new behaviours. Predators stalked prey, prey evolved camouflage or speed. Filter feeders swept the water for microscopic meals. Some animals began to burrow and build, reshaping the very architecture of the seafloor. The ecosystem grew dense with interactions, a web of life where no action stood alone. With every adaptation came a cascade of consequences, a butterfly effect that rippled outward across millennia. And the great mystery is not that this happened once, but that it kept happening slowly, surely, almost inevitably. Life was not content to remain as it was. It pushed, it pulled, it changed, always towards something more. Even then, some creatures began forming simple colonies, like ancient sea squirts and early relatives of corals. These beings shared resources, divided labour, and anchored themselves to rock and reef. Their descendants would one day build entire underwater cities, reefs teeming with light and colour. But here, in their early form, they were just learning the value of togetherness. Cooperation too is a survival strategy. Not every battle is fought alone, and among the creatures of this age, cooperation often meant thriving where others struggled. Tiny groups survived where giants fell. In the dance of evolution, size is not always strength. Let's not forget the silence that accompanied all of this. These animals did not roar or call. They did not sing or chirp. Their language was in movement, in chemistry, in silent signals sent through water. Their dances told stories of mating, of danger, of food. Their senses were tuned not to sound, but to pressure, to taste, to vibration. In many ways, they lived closer to the rhythm of the planet itself. The tides were their clocks, the moon their lantern, the earth slow turning their lullaby. And within that silence, something remarkable was beginning to stir. A pulse, faint but steady, like the beating of a primitive heart. One of the most significant moments in the history of animals was the emergence of a circulatory system to move nutrients with purpose, to pump fluids through a body, to sustain not just a cell but a network of living tissue. This was not merely plumbing, it was the beginning of inner life. In some early worms, a closed loop of vessels began to carry nutrients and oxygen more efficiently. Hearts, in their earliest forms, may have been little more than muscular tubes, squeezing rhythmically to push fluid forward. But from those tubes came the blueprint for every heart that now beats across the animal kingdom. To have a heart is to carry a rhythm inside you, one not imposed by the sea or sky, but generated within. That rhythm is still with us. Even now, your heart beats with echoes of those ancient seas, pulsing to the tempo of a story that began long before you were born. So as we picture those oceans swirling with new life, with creatures strange and soft and brave, let us remember what they gave us. Not just bones or eyes or brains, but the deep truth that life grows not by knowing where it's going, but by reaching, feeling, responding. The first animals were not perfect, but they were alive. And in their aliveness, they began the grand experiment we now continue. We carry their lessons in our blood, in our sight, in our shape. Their courage was quiet but profound. They moved forward in the dark, not knowing what they would become, just as we do now. Now imagine the ancient sea once more, its surface dappled with shifting light, its depths dark and full of whispers. That same ocean, which cradled the earliest stirrings of animal life, was still evolving, still offering its slow, patient stage to the drama of becoming. What began as tiny, soft-bodied wanderers had become an orchestra of motion, crawling, swimming, burrowing, hunting. But something deeper was unfolding too. The way creatures perceived each other, the way they responded not just to the world but to one another, was changing. Relationships formed. Predator and prey, parent and offspring, partners in coral colonies and sponge reefs. This marked not just survival, but the emergence of experience. The first animals did not think in the way we do, but they began to feel. Pressure, touch, warmth, fear. The world wasn't just a place to drift in, it was a place to interact with, to respond to know. And from knowing came memory, from memory behaviour, from behaviour the slow foundations of what would one day become consciousness. Even the simplest of creatures began to encode the world into their biology. A light-sensitive patch allowed one worm to sense day from night. A chemical signal helped a sponge recognise kin from stranger. These were not thoughts as we understand them, but they were decisions, tiny, instinctive, and profound. Each response shaped the next generation, sculpted over millions of years into eyes more precise, limbs more flexible, instincts more refined. Evolution did not race, it wandered. It tried and tried again. Many forms came and vanished. Some animals developed spines, others grew soft armour. Some formed partnerships with bacteria that glowed or digested food. The variety was endless. There were creatures that lived anchored to rocks, filtering food all day, and others that zipped through the water like darts. There were flatworms with eyes on their backs, and sea pens that unfurled like underwater fireworks. Each one was a solution to the question, how do we stay alive in a world that keeps changing? And the world was changing. Volcanic eruptions sent ash into the sky, oceans shifted in temperature, currents changed direction, new minerals entered the water, sometimes giving, sometimes poisoning, yet life endured because animals could adapt, not just in body, but in behaviour. One tiny creature might choose a cooler patch of water, another might burrow deeper into the sand. These small choices, driven by sensation, were survival tools as powerful as any claw or shell. And somewhere in these early seas, an extraordinary lineage was forming, the chordates. These animals had a flexible rod along their back, a precursor to a spine, and gill slits that filtered the water as they swam. They were not dominant, not yet, but they were new. From them would come fish, and from fish would come limbs, but that future still lay hidden beneath the waves. Let us linger for a moment in the time before that leap. Picture an ocean floor alive with motion, bristle worms weaving through sediment, early mollusks grazing on algae, sponges filtering the tide, jellies pulsing upward, carried by current and moonlight. Each creature played its role not as a performer, but as part of a living system. Their bodies may have been simple, but their roles were not. They cycled nutrients, stirred the seabed, transported energy up and down the food chain. In their quiet existence, they built the foundation for all ecosystems to come. Without them, there would be no forests, no rivers, no mammals or birds. Every tree and tiger, every feather and flower grew upon the scaffolding laid down by those first animals. And yet, for all their importance, their stories are hard to tell. Most left no skeletons. Their tissues vanished quickly after death, leaving behind only the rarest fossils, ghosts pressed into ancient rock. We know them not by their bones, but by their impact. Layers of sediment churned by burrowers, isotopic traces of respiration, chemical gradients that suggest photosymbiosis or digestion. We piece together their world like archaeologists reading a diary in ashes, and what we find is not noise or chaos, but rhythm, a pulse, a pattern, life rising, falling, diversifying, always moving like the tides that cradled it. Then slowly the arms of time reached forward. From soft trails in the mud came legs that would one day walk. From the gill slits of ancient swimmers came lungs that would breathe mountain air. From chemical signals came neurons, and from neurons came minds. But that journey was still ahead. Here in the depths of this early world, everything was becoming. The animals were not primitive, they were pioneers. They lived without knowing what they would become, and in doing so they became everything. They are in our blood, our eyes, our skin, the way your heart beats, the way your fingers curl, the way your body moves through space. All of it began in the currents of an ancient sea. Perhaps the most poetic truth of all is that life did not begin with a plan. There was no grand design, no finish line. The first animals did not aim to become lions or lizards or poets. They simply moved toward what worked. And from that movement came meaning. What they gave us is not just our biology, but our place. We are part of a long and wondrous unfolding. We do not stand at the top. We float in the current, shaped by everything that came before. So if ever you wonder where we come from, look not to the stars, but to the ocean, to the gentle stirrings in ancient water, to the soft creatures that crawled without shells, that fed without jaws, that swam without fins. They are still with us, in your heartbeat, in your breath, in the way your body knows how to move even when your mind grows tired. We are, all of us, children of that first quiet tide. The first animals did not roar, but they left echoes. And if you listen, truly listen, you can still hear them, not in words, but in waves, in the hush of the sea, in the silence that holds everything, in the earliest folds of life's history before claws scraped across stone or wings split the sky. The world was built by those without bones. These were the soft bodies, pliable, gentle, and patient, creatures without spines or shells, without roar or armour, yet they were the sculptors of the earth. To understand their role, we must go back to when the oceans were the only home for life, when land was bare and the sky untouched. It is easy to overlook the soft ones. Fossils favour the hard: bones, teeth, exoskeletons. But it was the soft-bodied animals who laid the groundwork for everything. They carved the seabed, stirred the currents, recycled the nutrients. Their shapes were simple, but their influence immense. The earliest of these soft beings were like silk threads floating in warm, shallow seas. Some drifted like ghosts, transparent and slow, letting the tide decide their direction. Others clung to rocks, mouths open to filter particles brought by the currents. These creatures, known as cnidarians, included ancient ancestors of jellyfish and sea anemones. They lacked brains, but they had a kind of awareness, a way of responding to touch, of recoiling from harm, of sensing light and darkness. Their tentacles waved like slow music, each movement a soft exchange between organism and ocean. They were not passive, they were alive with quiet complexity. Then came the worms, not the earthworms of garden soil, but their ancient marine relatives, segmented, bristled, unarmoured. They did something revolutionary. They dug. In burrowing through sediment, they changed everything. The ocean floor was no longer static. It became dynamic, oxygenated, full of new possibilities. By churning through the mud, they released trapped gases, allowed water to flow more freely, and created homes for other tiny organisms. This is called bioturbation, and it was one of the first great ecological transformations made by animals. These soft-bodied burrowers were engineers, altering the architecture of their world without knowing it. Some creatures, like the ancient priapulids, developed long, flexible bodies with grasping mouthparts. They were hunters in the silt, tracking tiny prey in the murky dark. Others, like the early kinnohainchs and nematodes, were so small they lived between grains of sand, threading their bodies through spaces no larger than a hair's width. Each one had a role. Some cleaned up waste, others fed on microbes, still others grazed on algae or scoured dead material. In doing so, they formed the base of food webs long before any vertebrate stirred. Without them, the ocean would have stagnated. Their softness was not a weakness, it was a gift, a way to explore, to adapt, to flow with the changes around them. The sponges, too, played a quiet but crucial part. They do not look like animals at all, but they are. They lack mouths, organs, and symmetry, yet they're alive, ancient and enduring. Sponges filter water through channels in their bodies, pulling in food and pushing out waste. A single sponge can move vast volumes of water in a day, purifying, circulating, enriching. On ancient reefs, they formed living filters, clearing the water for other creatures to thrive. Some even hosted microbial partners within their tissues, forming early examples of symbiosis, a cooperation that would become a central theme in life's story. Even among soft bodies, innovation thrived. Some developed cilia, those tiny beating hairs that allow movement and feeding. Others evolved toxins for defense, releasing stinging cells when touched. Flatworms developed eye spots that could detect light, guiding them toward or away from the sun's reach. Ribbon worms grew proboscises that shot out like harpoons to capture prey. Each adaptation was a whisper in the grand conversation of life. Try this. Now that. What if we? And through these whispers, the world changed. Slowly, quietly, profoundly. Let us pause in the Ediacaran seas, more than 50 million years ago, where some of the earliest known soft-bodied animals left their imprint. Insomnia, oval-shaped and ribbed like a jelly-stuffed pillow, glided across microbial mats, absorbing nutrients as it moved. Sprigina, with its segmented body and hint of bilateral symmetry, suggested a move toward more directed movement. Tribrachidium spun through the water with its three-armed form. These were not ancestors of all later animals. Many were evolutionary experiments, but they were real living beings, each testing new ways to survive. They left no bones, only impressions. Yet from these impressions, we learn that life has always been bold, even when soft. The great beauty of these creatures is not just in what they became, but in how they lived. They did not dominate their environment through force, but through integration. They lived with their world, not against it. Their bodies flowed with water rather than standing rigid against it. They used the sea's currents to feed, to move, to find each other. They adapted to the chemistry of the ocean, using its minerals to build tiny supports, or letting it pass through them entirely. In their vulnerability, they were responsive. In their simplicity, they were efficient. Life did not begin as a conquest. It began as a communion. Even today, many of these ancient lineages persist. Jellyfish still drift through every ocean. Sponges still cling to coral reefs. Worms still turn the seafloor, unseen but vital. Their forms have changed, but their essence remains. They are not fossils, they are companions. They are the beating heart of marine ecosystems, the recyclers, the breathers, the feeders of the world's most ancient rhythms. And though we often celebrate the bold, the lion, the eagle, the whale, it is these soft ones who hold the foundation. Their quiet work supports the dazzling show of life that came after. When you walk along a beach or look into a tide pool, remember them. The tiny, the yielding, the unnoticed. The animals without bones who made all the rest possible. Every complex organ, every swift predator, every moment of beauty or fear in the animal kingdom, it all began with softness. They were the first to feel the world and respond, the first to build without hands, to sculpt without tools. The soft bodies did not conquer the earth. They built it, and they are still building it, One breath, one ripple, one gentle movement at a time. Let us sink again into that ancient water, not with haste, but with the quiet reverence one might bring to a cathedral made of currents and silence. For within the depths, beneath the calm flicker of early sunlight, the soft-bodied animals were not only surviving, they were shaping something more profound than bones or battles. They were shaping the very environment around them. It is easy to overlook the importance of softness in a world that often prizes hardness. But in the beginning it was softness that reigned, not through domination but through presence. These creatures without shells or spines moulded the chemistry of oceans, recycled the nutrients of life, and prepared the stage for all that would follow. Their influence was not only biological but geological. They did not merely live upon the earth, they participated in its slow transformation. Sponges, with their porous forms and gentle filtering, drew in plankton and expelled purified water, setting the rhythm of marine breathing. Over millions of years, their filtering helped regulate the clarity and nutrient balance of seas, allowing light to reach deeper, opening ecological niches for photosynthetic life and more delicate organisms. Their slow pulsing of water was like a breath, not just for themselves but for the ecosystem they quietly served. Sea anemones, cousins to corals and jellies, anchored themselves to rocks and extended their tentacles like dancers, catching food while also creating safe havens in the folds of their bodies for tiny fish and crustaceans. These were not passive structures. They were living architects, designing the first complex habitats without knowing it. In time, some of these creatures began to secrete minerals, calcium carbonate, silica, to reinforce their forms. This wasn't the arrival of bone, but the first whispers of skeletons. The corals emerged, building reefs, not just as shelters, but as ecosystems. A coral reef is not one animal, it is a community, a city of polyps connected by shared tissue, communicating chemically, living in harmony with symbiotic algae that photosynthesize within their skin. This collaboration turned sunlight and carbon dioxide into energy, which fed the coral and in turn created the largest biogenic structures on Earth. Reefs began as a soft idea, a partnership, a merging of need and opportunity. They are the living legacy of ancient softness evolving into resilience. Elsewhere, worms continued their quiet revolution beneath the seabed. Some grew longer, developed more segments, more sophisticated muscles, and began to coordinate their movements through early nervous systems, not just reflex but pattern, a rhythm of peristalsis, a wave that moved from mouth to tail, carrying them through sediment and shadow. These worm-like animals, including ancestors of annelids, ploughed through mud, aerated it, fertilized it. Each tunnel they made, each layer they disturbed, made room for more oxygen, more complexity. They were gardeners before there were gardens, tilling the seafloor for life. Among the most graceful of the soft-bodied creatures were the comb jellies, or ctenophores. Their bodies shimmered with rows of cilia that refracted light into rainbows as they moved. Unlike jellyfish, they did not pulse through contraction, but glided with coordinated waves of ciliary motion, smooth, silent, and surreal. Some comb jellies evolved sticky cells instead of stinging ones, capturing prey with glue rather than venom. They were hunters of the planktonic realm, and some even developed rudimentary nerve nets, allowing more nuanced control over their elegant drift. In them we see the merging of sensation and movement, the gentle blooming of intelligence. A ctenophore, gliding through ancient darkness, did not need speed to thrive, it needed grace. But life, even then, was not only about taking. The soft-bodied animals also gave. Dead sponge tissue became nutrients for bacteria. Worm castings fertilized the ocean floor. Coral skeletons, once abandoned, became homes for others. In their living and in their dying, they fed the system that sustained them. They were not separate from their environment, they were woven into it. And this weaving formed the tapestry of early ecosystems. Not isolated threads, but interconnected strands, each soft and necessary. Some of these animals also began to sense not just light or touch, but chemical gradients. They could detect where food was or where danger lurked. This chemosensation was the beginning of decision. Some moved toward certain molecules, others fled from toxins. This simple ability became the seed of behavior, and with behavior came the subtle beginnings of individuality. A sponge may not think, but a worm that chooses which tunnel to follow, or a jelly that alters its path in response to the environment, is expressing something that will one day become choice. The foundation of all nervous systems, our own included, rests on the slow, gentle refinement of response. Softness allowed for more than flexibility. It allowed for evolution. Hard-shelled animals must molt to grow, a dangerous and energy-intensive process. Soft-bodied animals, on the other hand, could expand, stretch, divide. They could grow continuously, respond immediately, and adapt with astonishing speed. In their pliancy was power, and it is this very pliancy that helped give rise to bilateral symmetry, the mirrored left and right that most animals, including humans, now possess. Bilateral bodies could move with direction, seek out food, avoid threats. They had a front and a back, a head and a tail. And to guide this movement, some developed centralized nerve clusters, proto-brains, soft hubs of sensation and reaction. These were not thinkers, but they were feelers. They remembered patterns, anticipated outcomes, learned in the most primitive ways. The soft bodies were writing the early chapters of cognition. Let us not rush past the emotional resonance of these truths. To picture these ancient animals is to recognize that our own existence is not rooted in strength or speed, but in subtlety. Our ancestors were not titans, they were threads in a fluid tapestry, and those threads did not snap, they adapted, flexed, evolved. They made room for possibility. Without them, there would be no vertebrates, no mammals, no thought. Their intelligence was not in calculation, but in being. They taught us how to flow, how to feel, how to respond. In their yielding, they shaped the world, not just the ecosystems, but the very rules of biology. Today, we still live in the world they built. Coral reefs remain the rainforests of the sea. Worms still till our soil, jellyfish still pulse with the memory of ancient currents. Soft-bodied creatures still dominate the oceans by number, even if not by fame. Their resilience is quiet, their influence unshakable. And if you close your eyes beside a tide pool or float beneath a sunlit wave, you may feel them, not just as life, but as legacy. As the ones who whispered the earth into livability. There is something tender about a world made by creatures who left almost nothing behind. No bones to marvel at, no towering skeletons in museums, no fossilized jaws locked in some ancient battle. Just impressions, outlines, chemical echoes in rock. Traces so delicate that a single storm might have erased them forever. And yet, despite their near invisibility in stone, the soft-bodied animals were the silent architects of stability. Long before vertebrates rose and fell, before fanged predators prowled and feathered things flew, these quiet beings had already etched their legacy into the fabric of the planet, not with roar or weight, but with rhythm. A rhythm still felt in the tides, in the cycles of bloom and decay, in the softness of breath. In their final forms, many of these early animals would not survive the dramatic changes Earth would later offer. As oxygen levels rose and predators evolved, softness became vulnerability. Shells, exoskeletons, spines, these became the favoured tools of survival in a world shifting from communion to contest. But before armour was needed, the soft ones reigned in peace. Their existence was not passive but participatory. They helped regulate carbon, influence sediment, and crafted the very chemistry of the oceans. Sponges and worms and comb jellies may seem humble, but their combined effects altered the trajectory of evolution itself. They taught life how to persist. They gave shape to resilience not through domination, but through flexibility. Even as new animals arose, hard-bodied, swift, equipped with claws or teeth, the descendants of soft-bodied lineages endured. Some adapted, others retreated into safer niches, deeper waters, or more specialized lifestyles. Today's flatworms, sea slugs, tunicates, and hydroids are not echoes of a lost world. They are living continuations. Their biology still whispers of the Ediacaran and Cambrian, still carries genetic memories of the earliest partnerships and adaptations. They are reminders that life's story is not one of straight ascent, but of interwoven paths, some bold and noisy, others quiet and enduring. Think now of the humble planarian, a flatworm capable of regenerating its body from a mere fragment. Its nervous system is simple, yet sufficient to guide it toward light or away from harm. Its body is soft, unarmoured, vulnerable, and yet it persists, even thrives. Or the salp, a translucent barrel-shaped swimmer drifting through open ocean, feeding on plankton, forming long chains with others of its kind. Salps help regulate oceanic carbon, drawing it from surface to depth as they sink. They are soft-bodied, slow-moving and essential. Their fragility masks their power. The legacy of the soft-bodied animals is not only in biology but in philosophy. In a world that often celebrates force and conquest, they offer a different narrative. That strength lies in adaptation. That influence does not require hardness. That transformation can happen through stillness, through presence, through quiet repetition over time. These animals did not seek to control their world. They participated in it, responded to it, became part of its cycles. Their softness was not weakness, it was wisdom, it was alignment, it was the original language of life. Let us remember too that we are made of softness, our organs, our skin, our thoughts. Beneath the shell of bone, our bodies echo the fluid, flexible architecture of our ancestors. Our brains, those softest of organs, swim in cerebrospinal fluid, sensing the world not through pressure or rigidity, but through signals whispered across delicate neurons. The mechanisms of our motion, of our emotion, of our breath and balance, all owe their design to those first animals who learned to move, to feel, to filter. Inside our cells, the cytoskeletons shift and realign with every movement, just as they did in sponge and worm and jelly. We are not separate from the soft-bodied world. We are its continuation. Even our language is drawn from their legacy. When we speak of flowing, adapting, yielding, we speak the language of the sea. When we speak of resilience, we echo the survival of those who had no armour, but lived anyway. When we speak of beginnings, we speak of them, and when we sleep, when we dream, when our bodies become still and our minds float in imagined waters, we return, if only for a while, to that ocean where everything began in silence and softness. Now picture again the ancient reef, not as a ruin, but as a city alive. Sponges filtering water in rhythmic harmony, worms threading tunnels beneath, soft corals swaying, exchanging chemicals with light, transparent jellies pulsing like floating lanterns, each creature sent, yet part of a grand chorus, each movement small yet essential. This was not just biology, it was choreography, a dance older than language, slower than song, yet more enduring than any monument. That dance continues. It is in the heartbeat of every whale, in the glide of every octopus, in the flutter of plankton at the surface of the sea. The soft bodies that built the world are still building it breath by breath, ripple by ripple. So let us not forget them. Let us speak of them not as precursors but as poets, not as primitive but as profound. They taught the earth how to live, not by resisting it, but by becoming one with it. They gave rise to everything that walks, flies, thinks and dreams. And in the quiet corners of the ocean they still float, still feed, still form the fabric of ecosystems we barely understand. They are not gone, they are not past, they are presence. When you next walk by the sea, when your feet touch wet sand and you hear the hush of the tide, remember that this world was first shaped by creatures who never made a sound. Remember that their silence was not absence but foundation, their softness not fragility but beginning. We are their story, continued. Long before eyes blinked beneath eyebrows, long before pupils focused or eyelashes fluttered in dreams, there was a world entirely without seeing. The oceans were filled with movement, with hunger, with birth and death, but not with sight. Light touched the surface and scattered below, but no gaze rose to meet it. For millions upon millions of years, life lived in darkness, not because the world was dark, but because no one had yet invented the means to notice light. Creatures drifted and fed and swam by instinct, by chemical trail, by touch and pressure, but never by vision. Yet light was always there, waiting. It streamed across the ocean's surface like a silent offering, golden and warm. It filtered down in blurred waves through the shallows, carrying direction, heat and energy. And somewhere in the soft tissues of the first animals, the first question was asked, not in words but in molecules. What if we could sense the light? It began humbly, a patch of pigment-sensitive cells on the skin of a worm. These cells could not see shapes or shadows, but they could distinguish brightness from dimness. They could tell when the sun had risen, when a predator loomed, when a rock passed overhead. That was enough. Even a glimmer of awareness allowed the animal to shift, to hide, to move toward or away from the source. Evolution listened. It refined. Slowly, over generations, these light-sensitive patches deepened into pits. The pits focused the direction of light, giving more information than just brightness. Now they hinted at where the light was coming from. In the soft tissues of ancient sea creatures, something astonishing was forming, the blueprint of the eye. The Cambrian seas, already a cradle of innovation, became the stage for this unfolding. In creatures like trilobites and early mollusks, compound eyes began to appear, clusters of lenses, each like a miniature window stitched together into a dome of perception. These eyes were not like ours. They did not blink or cry or gaze, but they could see motion. They could track light. They could read the flicker of a passing shadow or the flash of a darting fin. With vision came a revolution. Animals could now find food with precision. They could avoid danger before it arrived. They could seek mates, explore terrain, navigate the shimmering underwater landscapes. The world, once felt only through touch and taste, could now be seen. Imagine the first creature to witness sunrise, not in metaphor but with literal vision. To float near the ocean's surface and sense for the first time the swelling of gold across the sky. To notice the way the light bent around ripples, how it danced on scales and stones. That moment was not recorded, but it was lived. And from it, 1,000 possibilities were born. With every improvement in the eye's structure came greater range and clarity. From light-detecting cups came pinhole cameras, then lenses that could bend and focus, then irises to regulate brightness, then muscles to turn and tilt the gaze. Each step allowed more detail, more nuance, more life. Seeing became not just survival but experience. But the rise of vision was not only a physical change, it rewired behaviour. Animals began to move differently, to coordinate in ways that relied on sight. Schools of fish formed, darting together in shimmering synchrony. Predators ambushed prey with calculated timing. Defensive patterns evolved, bright colours to warn, camouflage to disappear, flashing spots to confuse. The body became a message board, readable only through eyes. Evolution now sculpted not just what a creature was, but how it looked to others. The world was no longer invisible, it had an audience. Even within the eye itself, nature explored countless variations. The compound eyes of insects, with hundreds of facets, offered wide angles and fast reactions. The camera-like eyes of cephalopods and vertebrates delivered sharp focus and depth. Some creatures evolved eyes on stalks, others embedded deep in armour. Some saw ultraviolet, others infrared. A mantis shrimp to this day carries eyes that detect polarised light and more colours than any human can imagine. It is not just that animals began to see, it is that the ways they saw multiplied like stars across the sky. And as vision deepened, so did the world it revealed. The reef once felt in the dark now burst into a painting of motion and colour. The forest of the future would shimmer with new urgency. The sky would eventually host creatures who saw the curve of Earth from above, but it all began here, in the ancient ocean, in the soft stirrings of pigment and pit. There was no sudden spark, no magic moment when an eye opened like a flower. There were only steps, stacked like sediment, each generation refining the gift, passing on a clearer window to the world. Let us pause to consider what this meant, not just for predators and prey, but for beauty. For with sight came the first colours seen, the first moments when shape and hue mattered. A coral's red no longer simply absorbed sunlight. It could now be noticed. A fish's blue shimmer became not just chemistry but communication. The world, once functional and blind, began to bloom. Eyes gave animals a new way to interact with their environment, but they also gave the environment a way to be noticed, appreciated, displayed. Light was no longer just energy. It was information. It was meaning. This transition was not swift. It took hundreds of millions of years, and even today some animals still live without eyes. Deep-sea creatures, cave dwellers, parasites. But those who did see changed the game for everyone. The entire balance of ecosystems shifted. The arms race of life was redrawn. Camouflage grew more intricate, mating dances more elaborate, territorial displays more vivid. The body became a stage, and vision its audience. And through it all, the sun kept rising, casting its ancient light across the sea, waiting for more eyes to open. So much of life's richness now depends on vision, on what can be seen, followed, remembered. But it began with a whisper in the dark, with a patch of pigment and the hint of motion and the curiosity to follow the light. Our own eyes, those soft and complex globes, carry the memory of that journey. Inside their jelly-and nerves lies a story billions of years old. Every blink is a continuation, every glance a tribute. And when you gaze at the sunrise or watch light ripple across water, you're not just seeing, you're participating in a tradition as old as animals themselves. You're witnessing the unfolding that once began in the dark when the sea first noticed the sun. Let us move gently from that first flicker of light to the deepening world it unveiled. For once the eyes opened, truly opened, the ocean was never the same. Creatures no longer drifted by feel alone. Now they could see the glint of scales, the tremble of movement, the silhouette of danger. What had been vague became vivid. What had been intuition became information. Vision turned the sea from a whispering room into a stage filled with light and form and shadow. And in that unfolding theatre, new behaviours emerged. Animals watched, waited, mirrored, remembered. Vision didn't just change how they hunted or hid, it changed who they were. The brain began to grow in answer to the eye. Where light was seen, thought followed. Perception demanded processing. Nerve clusters became more intricate. The simple net of sensation became a branching tree of interpretation. The world was no longer just felt, it was known. As eyes grew more complex, so too did the dance between predator and prey. Some creatures evolved dazzling flashes of colour to confuse or startle. Others faded into the background, mirroring sand or coral or kelp. Some animals developed eyes on the tops of their heads to watch the surface while resting on the seafloor. Others, like certain fish and cephalopods, evolved independent control of each eye, seeing two different scenes at once. Sight was no longer just a survival tool, it was a driver of innovation. And with each adaptation came a countermeasure. The arms race of light had begun, and yet, amid all this tactical refinement, something else quietly bloomed. Awareness of beauty. It's a soft truth, often overlooked in the hard sciences. But vision allowed animals not only to survive, it allowed them to notice. A reef bathed in light, a partner's shimmer, the slow spiral of a falling feather. There is no way to measure whether early animals appreciated beauty as we do, but their behaviour hints at something beyond utility. Peacocks did not evolve iridescent tails because they were practical. Butterflies did not develop intricate wing patterns to better digest leaves. These features were invitations, visual poems offered to others. The eye became not just a tool but a mirror. It reflected not only the world outside but something forming within. As animals began to select mates based on visual signals, evolution took a new turn. No longer were traits favoured solely for function, they were favoured for appearance. A fin's curve, a feather's hue, a pattern's rhythm, all began to matter. Sexual selection layered complexity upon natural selection, and the results filled the world with a kind of exuberance. From the brilliant cuttlefish, who can change colour in waves of shifting pattern, to the glass-wing butterfly whose near-invisible wings shimmer only at certain angles, vision reshaped bodies in the image of light. And as this happened, the brain evolved alongside the eye, not just to see but to interpret, to choose, to prefer. In creatures like octopuses, vision grew into a central form of communication. Without voice, without song, they speak in colour, blushing red with anger, paling with fear, blooming patterns across their skin to attract or distract. Their skin is alive with chromatophores, tiny pigment sacs controlled by nerves and muscles, allowing them to paint their emotions directly upon themselves. To witness an octopus shift from deep black to coral pink in seconds is to see thought become colour, feeling become visible. And this is only possible because there are eyes to see it. Eyes on both sides scanning the world, reading the signs not just of danger but of meaning. Even in the simplest creatures, visual cues began to organise behaviour. Shoals of fish turned as one, each watching its neighbour. Schools became waves, each individual responding to the shimmer and angle of light. Predators learned to isolate a single fish by disrupting that visual harmony. The dance of life became increasingly choreographed, guided by what was seen and how it was interpreted. And across time, in both sea and sky, eyes continued to refine. Insects developed compound eyes with panoramic fields and rapid motion detection. Birds evolved eyes with extraordinary acuity, able to see ultraviolet markings on feathers invisible to us. Some reptiles developed a third eye, an organ atop the head sensitive to light and dark, helping regulate their internal clocks. Vision, once a simple brightness sensor, had become a world shaper. But with this expansion came something quieter too: memory. A visual system demands recall, to recognize a path, a predator, a pattern. And in that recognition lies the seed of memory, of learning, of preference. A crab avoiding a certain shadow, a bird remembering a berry's colour, a human child recognizing a mother's face. The eye is not just a receiver, it is a storyteller. Each image becomes a frame in the long film of life, and over time those frames began to layer, to form meaning, to carry emotion. The world became not just what is, but what was seen before, what might be seen again. The light that shaped eyes also shaped cycles. As vision expanded, animals began to organize themselves around the sun, not just for warmth but for rhythm. Diurnal and nocturnal patterns emerged, sleep and wakefulness, feeding and rest, migration, mating, all tied to the turning of light into darkness and back again. The eye became a clock, a compass, a calendar. Creatures began to follow the moon, to wait for dawn, to sing when the light changed. Some animals evolved lenses that allowed them to see in nearly total darkness. Others lost their eyes entirely, retreating into caves where light no longer offered advantage. Even in absence, vision had power. What makes all this more extraordinary is that vision arose not once, but many times. At least 50 different animal lineages evolved eyes independently. Nature kept reaching for sight over and over again. each time a different version, simple or complex, clustered or singular. It is as if light called out, and life could not help but answer. In flatworms and mollusks, in spiders and vertebrates, in insects and cnidarians, eyes opened, adjusted, transformed. There was not one path, but many, and all led to light. This diversity is still with us. From the photoreceptive eye spots of starfish to the giant lens of a squid's eye, the world is full of different ways to see, and each one is a solution to a question asked by an ancient ancestor: where is the light? That question, asked silently and without words, shaped the architecture of life. It sculpted faces, moulded behaviour, rewired brains. It created the world we now take for granted, a world of colour and motion, of sunrise and sparkle, of eyes meeting eyes across oceans and forests and time. And so, as we blink beneath fluorescent lights or glance at screens or watch the play of sunlight across leaves, we are participating in something ancient, something soft and brave and full of wonder. We are living in the world that sight built, and our eyes, delicate and profound, carry the memory of every ancestor who turned toward the sun and saw. And now let us follow vision to where it leads, not just outward into the world, but inward into understanding. For what began as pigment-sensing light evolved into something far more intricate: awareness, response, anticipation. In the earliest oceans, light simply passed through the water, indifferent and unacknowledged. But once eyes emerged, the world became visible, and that visibility made all the difference. No longer were animals moving only by chemical signals or chance encounters. They could see each other. They could recognize space, distance, movement. This created not just strategy but intention. To see meant to choose, to avoid, to seek, to track. And in those choices, a new kind of intelligence began to unfurl. In some lineages, the connection between vision and brain grew remarkably strong. Cephalopods, for instance, evolved highly developed eyes independently from vertebrates. A cuttlefish can see polarized light, shift its skin in waves of changing color, and solve puzzles in laboratory settings. Its eye, structured much like ours, delivers a wide-angle view with a large pupil that can expand or contract dramatically, depending on light levels. These animals do not rely on sight just to navigate. They use it to learn, to observe, to respond with agility to the needs of the moment. Their brains, shaped by what their eyes receive, reflect a world of nuance, not just survival. As the world diversified, so did the relationships between seeing and being seen. In the animal kingdom, being visible became both risk and opportunity. Prey needed camouflage to avoid being spotted. Predators needed clarity and sharp focus to strike with precision. Some fish evolved eyes that could shift color perception depending on depth. Some reptiles developed slit pupils to detect movement in low light. Owls, with forward-facing eyes and specialized facial discs, gathered sound and light in tandem, triangulating the world with eerie precision. And humans, in their upright posture and high acuity color vision, evolved the capacity not only to recognize faces, but to read emotions, subtle expressions, fleeting glances. The eye became a window into the mind. But it is not only in biology that vision matters, it is in memory, in story, in imagination. Our dreams are built of images. Our past is remembered in snapshots. Our future is often envisioned before it arrives. The same structure that helped a worm distinguish light from dark now allows an artist to paint, a poet to describe a sunset, a child to read a book and imagine far-off worlds. The eye, once a humble cup of pigment cells, became an instrument of empathy, of memory, of wonder. The retina, that delicate membrane at the back of the eye, is an extension of the brain. It does not merely send signals, it begins processing them before they even reach the mind. Photoreceptor cells called rods and cones capture light and colour. Neural layers sort, emphasize, and compress the visual data. By the time signals travel along the optic nerve, the brain is already halfway into the act of seeing. And once they arrive at the visual cortex, a symphony of interpretation begins. Lines become edges, edges become objects, objects become meaning, and meaning sometimes becomes feeling. This is the subtle power of sight. It allows the world not just to exist, but to matter. Even as vision enabled the animal kingdom to thrive, it also taught us about vulnerability. Eyes are soft, exposed, unarmoured. They must remain wet, open, alert. They are easily damaged, easily fooled by illusion or shadow. And yet, we rely on them with an intensity that borders on sacred. We meet each other's gaze to affirm connection. We close our eyes to rest or to trust. We weep from emotion, from joy, from grief. Tears rising unbidden through the organ that was once just a sensor of light. What began as a tool became a mirror, and then a mirror of mirrors. To look into another's eyes is to see not just vision, but reflection, recognition. Vision has also shaped the way we explore. Telescopes extend the reach of our eyes across time and space. Microscopes invite us into realms too small for unaided sight. Cameras capture light and freeze it into memory. Paintings interpret the scene. Films bring it to motion. Entire civilizations have been built upon the seen and the shown. And yet, we still carry the ancient origin of it all in our bodies. Our eyes, like all eyes, are heirlooms. They are layered with evolutionary memory. Every lens and nerve, every pigment and pupil shaped by hundreds of millions of years of creatures looking toward the light. And still, not all vision is external. Some animals see in ways we cannot. Sharks can detect the faint electrical fields of muscle contraction. Some snakes perceive infrared heat. Mantis shrimp, with up to 16 types of photoreceptors, experience a visual world so alien we can scarcely imagine it. Their perception is not ours. Their light is not our light. Vision then is not a single experience. It is a spectrum shaped by what each creature needs to know, to survive, to love, to live. Perhaps the most poetic truth of all is this: seeing is not passive, it is participatory. To see is to touch with light. When you look at something, photons bounce off it, enter your eye, strike your retina, and cause a chemical reaction that becomes sensation. In this way, seeing is not distant, it is intimate. Light that touched a leaf, a face, a cloud now touches you. Every act of vision is a meeting, and in that meeting something sacred happens. We become part of what we observe. We are no longer just creatures in the world, we are witnesses to it. So the next time you look at the ocean, or watch the sunrise, or gaze into the eyes of someone you love, remember where that gift began. In the soft tissue of a simple animal who sensed light, in the slow accumulation of pigment and shape and function, in the patience of nature, building lens upon the lens, refining meaning from brightness. We owe our wonder to those first eyes, those ancient questions posed in silence. What is this glow? Where does it go? What if I followed it? And we still follow it, across days and seasons, across galaxies and generations. The eye is not just an organ, it is a path. It is the thread that connects us to our most distant ancestors, to each other, to the stars. Light arrives, we receive it, and in receiving we remember. Before the continents wore forests and birds drew lines across the sky, before vertebrates made homes on land or creatures breathed air into lungs, there was the Cambrian, an era not marked by noise or conquest, but by a crawling silence that filled the oceans like breath. It was a dreamlike time, strange and slow and filled with forms the world had never seen before. In this silence, life did not bloom in chorus, but crept forward in whispers. The sea floor, once a flat canvas of bacterial mats and simple creatures, became a playground of motion. For the first time, animals pushed against gravity with limbs, tested edges with legs, scanned their surroundings with eyes. They didn't roar or rumble, they crawled, slid, floated. The ocean was thick with becoming, a soup of invention where every ripple might carry something new. This was the Cambrian dream, a period not just of diversification but of awakening. The world had already been preparing for this moment for millions of years. Oxygen had quietly gathered in the atmosphere. Minerals had become more available. Microbial life had already restructured Earth's chemistry. But it was in the Cambrian, starting around 51 million years ago, that animals took those invisible preparations and turned them into bodies. Real, complex, mobile bodies. Not because they wanted to dominate, but because the environment allowed them to try. Many of the creatures of this time would look alien to us now. Take hallucigenia, for instance, an animal so baffling that paleontologists once reconstructed it upside down. Its body was long and tubular, with rows of spines sticking out of its back and stilt-like legs beneath. It crawled along the seafloor with a gait no one alive today replicates, balanced between past and possibility. Or consider Opabinia, a creature with 5 eyes on stalks and a flexible snout like a hose. It scanned the mud for food, reached with its proboscis, and drifted through its quiet kingdom with curiosity. These were not monsters, they were experiments, each one a question formed into flesh. Could legs grow here? Could eyes go there? Could we move this way? Evolution answered by testing, by building bodies with no precedent and letting them exist for a time. Many left no descendants, but they left their shapes etched into stone, like dreams pressed into the fabric of the earth. And those dreams were varied. Worm-like creatures with bristles moved through sediment, while trilobites with jointed legs and compound eyes scuttled across the bottom. Anomalocaris, once the top predator of the Cambrian seas, swam with lobed fins and gripped prey with spiked appendages. Its circular mouth spun open like a camera lens. It had no bones, no jaws, but it hunted with confidence, a ghost of predation, in a world still figuring out what fear was. The Cambrian was not a single event but a stretch of time where life moved from suggestion to detail. Before this, animals existed, but they were simple, often soft-bodied, limited in form. The Cambrian brought form in abundance. Hard parts, shells, spines, exoskeletons, began to appear more regularly, allowing fossilization, but also offering protection and structure. These new features gave animals the ability to burrow more deeply, to grow larger, to explore new habitats. The ecosystem itself became layered. There were now top predators and bottom dwellers, scavengers and filter feeders. Energy flowed in new directions. Life became more than presence, came interaction. What makes this time remarkable is not just the diversity of forms, but the speed at which they appeared. Over a few tens of millions of years, a blink in geological terms, most of the major animal body plans still present today emerged. Arthropods with segmented limbs, mollusks with soft bodies and hard shells, chordates with early spinal cords. This suddenness, at least in fossil terms, has led scientists to name it the Cambrian explosion. But it was not an explosion in the explosive sense. It was more like a slow illumination, as if someone dimmed the lights for hundreds of millions of years, and now, suddenly, creatures came into focus one by one, each more intricate than the last. The Cambrian seas were not empty stages, they were crowded, pulsing, alive with movement. Yet they were also quiet. No birds called, no insects buzzed, no mammals howled. Sound, as we know it, did not yet rule the world. Instead, the silence of the Cambrian was filled with motion. The flick of an appendage, the ripple of a body through water, the settling of sand after a trilobite's crawl. Each creature carried its own rhythm, a pattern of presence that shaped the environment around it. Some grazed on microbial mats, clearing paths. Others filtered particles, cycling nutrients. Each body was a new instrument in the great silent symphony of life. What allowed this blossoming was not just biological readiness, but environmental support. Oxygen levels had finally risen high enough to support more active metabolisms. The oceans had become more stable, layered in temperature and chemistry. The Earth itself had calmed after periods of glaciation and upheaval. And so, in this moment of planetary stillness, life moved forward, not with drama, but with determination. The Cambrian creatures did not know they were making history. They were only responding, growing, moving, testing what a body could be. And yet the mark they left is lasting. Today our own bodies carry the echoes of their architecture. We have bilateral symmetry just as they did. We have segmentation, layering, sensory processing, gifts passed down not from any one species, but from the collective experimentation of this ancient dream time. Even our imagination, when faced with unknown life, often recreates forms from the Cambrian. Tentacles, compound eyes, articulated limbs. They are burned into the memory of life itself. To understand the Cambrian is to understand that complexity is not an end goal, it is a path. These creatures were not more advanced than those that came before, just more varied. They opened doors, but they did not close them. They tried things out. Some of those things worked, others faded. But every shape, every limb, every eye stalk was a sentence in the story of becoming. They were not building toward us, they were building outward in all directions. So when we picture that ancient sea, let us not imagine a battlefield or a factory, but a garden, one where each creature was a bloom, opening in response to conditions just right. The water was warm, the minerals were plenty, the time was ripe, and so life unfolded, softly, quietly, with legs and eyes and intentions. The Cambrian dream was not loud. It did not shout its arrival. It crawled, it slid, it shimmered, and in doing so it shaped everything to come. The Cambrian dream deepened, like a tide that did not crash but crept, slowly lifting every corner of the sea into motion. In this world of gentle unfolding, something more than shape was emerging, something like strategy, like the beginning of choice. Animals were not simply drifting now. They were navigating, burrowing, following trails. They had begun to map their world, not with thoughts or tools, but with bodies that remembered. A trilobite did not think in language, but its legs traced patterns into the sediment, paths it could follow, paths others might read. A worm might return to the same burrow each evening, sensing that here, beneath the silt, there was safety. And in those soft repetitions, life became patterned. Repeated behaviors became habits. Habits became adaptations. Evolution did not just change bodies, it began to shape rhythms. As the seafloor became more crowded, animals responded not by retreating but by exploring new niches. Some rose higher into the water column, flapping fins or wriggling in slow spirals to find space above the bustle. Others sank deeper, pressing into the sediments, where oxygen was thinner but competition was less. Some began to build structures of mud or secretions, tubes to live in, shells to carry. These early engineers were not conscious of what they were creating, but their constructions reshaped the landscape. Tube dwellers added texture to the flat plains. Shell carriers left trails that altered current flow. Even the simple act of burrowing changed the chemistry of the seabed, drawing oxygen deeper, unlocking nutrients, and preparing the way for future ecosystems. Communication too began to evolve, not through sound but through form. Colour, shape, motion, all became signals. Anemone-like creatures waved feathery arms not just to feed, but to display territory. Trilobites with ridged exoskeletons might have signalled species or sex. Patterns on shells began to emerge, perhaps camouflage, perhaps warning. Eyes, which had become more common and complex, demanded a visible world. And so the world responded, growing more visible in return. Every creature was both sender and receiver of messages, even if it didn't know it. A ripple meant movement, a flash meant presence. The ocean, once a place of undifferentiated murk, became layered with meaning. In this era, the food web grew in complexity. Filter feeders drew nutrients from the current. Grazers scraped microbial mats. Predators roamed, scanning for soft-bodied prey, and scavengers followed in their wake. For the first time, energy passed through multiple hands before returning to the earth. One animal's waste became another's feast. Death itself became part of the design, no longer just an end, but a contribution. The cycling of matter, the spiral of nutrients, the rise and fall of populations, all of it came alive in the Cambrian. There were no seasons as we know them, but there were cycles, growth and stillness, expansion and collapse. And through it all, the ocean breathed. Not quickly, not with drama, but with a long, slow rhythm that echoed in every creature it cradled. Among the strangest and most elegant of Cambrian beings were the echinoderms, early relatives of starfish and sea urchins. Their bodies, built on fivefold symmetry, moved in radial patterns, gliding across the seafloor with tube-like feet and water-powered limbs. They had no heads, no centralized brains, but they thrived. Their movement was coordinated not by command but by flow, signals passing through networks of nerves and water-filled canals. These creatures were not hunters, They were grazers, recyclers, sifters of the seabed. But in their architecture they revealed something new, that intelligence could be distributed, that presence did not need a centre. They reminded the ocean that form could be fluid, that the path forward did not always look like a line. Chordates too were present, small soft-bodied swimmers with notochords and gill slits. They were not yet fish, but they carried the seeds of future backbones. Pikaia, a worm-like swimmer with a flexible rod down its back, flicked through the water with side-to-side motion, a movement we still carry in our vertebrate spines. These creatures had no armour, no weapons, no elaborate senses, but they moved with direction. They had a front and a back, a purpose to their motion. From such unassuming swimmers would come sharks, birds, humans, but in this moment they were only gentle passengers in the Cambrian tide, unaware of what they carried in their flesh. The Cambrian dream was not without struggle. Predation emerged with teeth not yet hardened, with appendages that gripped but did not crush. It brought urgency to evolution. Shells grew thicker, eyes became more refined, speed increased. Some creatures fled into the sediment, others into the water column. A few grew spines or toxins, but the arms race of this time was not yet frantic. It was exploratory, like dancers learning new steps. Trial and error still ruled, and the ocean was forgiving. There was space to fail, space to vanish, space to begin again. Fossils from this era are rare but exquisite. Burgess Shale in Canada, Chengjiang in China, places where mud and chance preserved entire communities in a flash of silt. In those layers, we see the texture of life as it was. Tiny leg hairs, eye facets, gut tracts filled with last meals, not just bones but behaviours. We see who crawled beside whom, who buried themselves, who hunted. It is as if the Cambrian reached forward through the time, offering us a moment of stillness, a portrait of the sea before noise. These fossils are not relics, they are messages, not words, but presence. We were here, they say. We moved, we fed, we lived in silence. And still, it is the silence that defines this age. There were no voices yet, no howls or clicks or bird song, only the quiet labour of life inventing itself, the slow rustle of limbs through sediment, the soundless flick of a fin. Even now, when you dive into deep water, you can feel it, that ancient hush, that presence of becoming. The Cambrian did not leave us language, but it left us form. It shaped the way life builds itself, from sponge to spine, from eye to limb. And though its creatures are gone, their questions remain. What can a body do? How can it move? What does it mean to seek, to respond, to persist? These were not philosophical inquiries. They were embodied, lived in cells and nerves and skin. They were written in the geometry of legs and the flutter of gills. The Cambrian was not a climax, it was a prologue. It told the story of what could be, and we, even now, are part of that story's unfolding. The Cambrian dream did not end with a crash, but with a drift. As quietly as it began, it gave way to other rhythms, other architectures of life, but its legacy did not vanish. It sank deeper, like roots into soil, anchoring everything that came after. The strange creatures of that age, with their eyes on stalks and spiny backs, their legs like brushes and mouths like pincers, did not vanish entirely. Some were pruned by time, some continued down other branches, and some gave rise to what we now recognize in ourselves. Their innovations, segmentation, symmetry, movement, sensing, became the scaffolding of future life. But more than the structures they left behind, it is the style of their becoming that still pulses through biology. They tried, they experimented, they reshaped their world not with violence, but with curiosity. By the end of the Cambrian, ecosystems were no longer shallow sketches, they were textured, layered, rich. Coral-like animals built reefs, offering shelter and complexity. Bottom feeders transformed sediments into chemical mosaics. Plankton drifted in every current, feeding new webs of life. Predators lurked, some with improved eyes and faster limbs, pushing prey toward cleverer hiding places. Life had become a dialogue, not just between organism and environment, but between organism and organism. Competition and cooperation, avoidance and pursuit, symbiosis and sabotage. These were not abstractions. They were visible in every interaction, every flick of a fin or twist of a worm. And though the seas were still the only stage, they teemed with rehearsals for everything to come. It is easy, from the distance of hundreds of millions of years, to think of these beings as primitive. They had no voices, no cultures, no tools, but what they had was potential, and they used it. They evolved eyes from skin, brains from nets of nerves, joints from soft folds. What we call intelligence began here, not as thought, but as reaction refined into memory, movement honed into strategy, a trilobite steering away from a shadow, an early chordate adjusting its swimming to a new current. These were the preludes to thinking, not in words, not in ideas, but in action. Awareness was seeded long before it flowered. The fossil record grows sparse as the Cambrian draws to a close. Some animals flourished, others dwindled. Extinction swept through, not cataclysms, but soft disappearances, layers closing over bodies that had tried and failed. Yet nothing was lost. Even those that left, no descendants contributed to the toolkit of life. Their genes may have merged with others, their traits recombined, their stories retold in new forms. Evolution is not a ladder, it is a tide. It carries everything forward, even the things it forgets. And while the Cambrian was a chapter of form, it was also a chapter of space. Life began to stretch into deeper waters, into darker zones, into finer ecological roles. The ocean, once a single room, became a mansion of possibilities. Animals adapted to pressure, to light, to the presence of others. Burrowers dug deeper, swimmers rose higher. The middle waters filled with drifters and hunters. Some animals began to colonize brackish waters, venturing toward river mouths, flirting with the idea of land. They were not ready yet, but the question had been asked. Could life move beyond the sea? It would take millions more years to answer, but the seed was planted here, in the Cambrian, in the soft crawlings and silent decisions of creatures who could not know what their questions meant. They only lived, adjusted, survived. They only responded, and that was enough. In those responses lay everything, the origin of skeletons, of senses, of systems and skulls. Our own backbone is a geological memory. Our nerves a braided thread from that long-gone tide. The Cambrian reminds us that becoming does not always announce itself. There was no signal, no singular moment when life turned a corner. There was only time filled with motion, only a quiet unfolding. Today, we are dazzled by creatures of size and colour, eagles and elephants, whales and wolves. But none of them would exist without the ghosts of Opabinia and Hallucigenia, without the soft wanderers of mud and current. The flamboyance of modern life is a song written in a language first scribbled in the Cambrian silt. Even the silence matters, that deep aquatic hush, broken only by currents and movement, shaped the first sensory systems. Hearing had not yet evolved in its fullness, so touch and light and chemical trace were the dominant tongues. Vision blossomed in that quiet, unbothered by noise. Nervous systems grew more sensitive. Muscles coordinated in fluid stillness. When sound did finally enter biology, it entered a world already rich in perception, already fluent in subtlety. The Cambrian creatures taught us to sense not just the loud but the low, the shift of current, the temperature gradient, the proximity of another being. They made us sensitive to life's textures, not just its volume. Their beauty too was unusual. Not designed to please, not evolved for show, but still astonishing. Lacy gills, translucent flaps, iridescent eyes. Even their names, Waiwaxia, Morella, Aishaya, sound like dreams. Their forms were not yet constrained by modern patterns. They were asymmetric, experimental, sometimes seeming like three creatures sewn together. But that freedom birthed everything. It was the freedom of first steps, of trying in all directions. So the Cambrian ends, but its dream continues. We carry it in our DNA, in the way we move and sense and build. We carry it in the questions we still ask. How did life begin? What can a body do? What does it mean to be aware? The Cambrian answers not with conclusions, but with process, with the evidence of having tried over and over until something worked. It was not perfect, it was not planned, it was alive. When we walk beside the sea today, or look at the stars and wonder where we came from, we are not just remembering distant ancestors. We are remembering a world that was quiet, that was soft, that crawled before it ran. A world that built everything not from dominance but from dreaming. And still, deep in the ocean, in the flick of a shrimp, in the shimmer of a jellyfish, in the gentle drift of a sea cucumber across the sand, the Cambrian dream lives on. Before there was rhythm, there was flow. Before hearts beat within chests or blood coursed through veins, there was a quiet movement inside the earliest animals, a slow circulation of fluid guided by the push and pull of cells contracting in unison, with no sound, no song, just motion. In the beginning, life did not need a heart. The first single-celled beings absorbed nutrients through membranes, drifting in oceans rich with what they needed. Even simple multicellular creatures survive by diffusion, their bodies small enough, thin enough for the sea to bathe every cell directly. But as animals grew larger, more complex, with layers of tissue and specialized parts, something else was required, a way to deliver nourishment, oxygen, and messages to every part of the body. That necessity sparked a revolution, quiet and crucial, the birth of circulation, and with it, the first heartbeat. It began as a simple pulsing tube, a muscular vessel running along the body of a worm-like creature. This tube didn't have chambers or valves or complex controls. It contracted in waves, squeezing fluid forward, pausing, then squeezing again. This motion, this wave, was life in motion. In time, the rhythm became steadier, stronger, more reliable. The fluid inside, blood or something like it, carried oxygen and nutrients, delivering them across distances too great for simple diffusion. Some of these primitive circulatory systems were open, with blood-bathing organs directly sloshing gently through the body cavity before returning. Others, like those of early chordates, began to close the loop, guiding blood along defined paths through vessels. This was not invention, but evolution's quiet response to need. When structure allowed movement and movement met function, a pattern emerged. That pattern was the pulse. The pulse came not from command, but from coordination. Cells along the muscular tube learned to contract in harmony, passing the signal like a ripple through water. Some of the earliest heart-like structures didn't beat on their own. They responded to cues from nearby tissues, to the flow of calcium ions, to the rhythms of the body itself. But as life grew more demanding, faster, more active, more precise, these pulses became self-sustaining. Pacemaker cells evolved, generating electrical signals independently. The heart learned to set its own tempo. It became an instrument, not just of survival, but of self-regulation. In arthropods like trilobites and early crustaceans, hearts began to pump hemolymph through open systems, with sinuses rather than veins, but still with direction. The beat helped move oxygen and nutrients, helped remove waste. These hearts were simple, sometimes little more than muscular sacs, but they worked. In early fish-like chordates, the circulatory system became fully closed. The blood travelled from a central heart through arteries to capillaries and back through veins. This layout brought precision and with it potential. Organs could specialise knowing they would receive what they needed. Muscles could grow stronger. Brains could develop further. All because a heart was sending tirelessly the essence of life to where it was needed most. The Cambrian seas, where so much first unfolded, were a testing ground for these innovations. Creatures glided, burrowed, chased, and fed, and within them, hidden from the fossil record, tiny hearts beat in silence. We have no imprints of them in stone, we cannot see their shapes, but we know they must have been there. No creature with layers and motion and growth could live without some internal river. The heart was not yet the centre of emotion or symbol of courage. It was a pump, a pulse, a promise. It said only this: keep going. As evolution progressed, the heart evolved in parallel with every new form. In mollusks, some grew multiple hearts, branchial hearts to send blood through gills, systemic hearts to push it through the body. In annelids, tiny auxiliary hearts helped push blood through long segmented bodies. In fish, the heart developed chambers, a single atrium and a ventricle, creating a loop that sent blood to the gills, then onward to tissues. This pattern, simple but effective, laid the groundwork for even more intricate systems to come. And always there was rhythm. Even when the body slept, the heart worked. Even when other systems paused, the beat went on. It is strange to consider that something so vital leaves so little trace in deep time. Bones fossilize, shells endure, but hearts made of soft tissue vanish. We reconstruct them from clues, from vessel grooves, from comparisons to living relatives, from the logic of function. And yet, though we may not see them, we can imagine them hundreds of millions of years ago, beating inside soft-bodied animals with no voices and no eyes, guiding the flow of life through forms still unfamiliar. We can feel their presence in our own bodies. The rhythm that began in the Cambrian still echoes in our chests. There is a poetic simplicity in the fact that the heart, one of the first organs to become rhythmic, is also one of the last to stop. From embryo to elder, its beat defines us. Its sound marks beginnings, its silence endings. And though we've learned to associate it with love and courage and vulnerability, it began as something much humbler, a tube, a twitch, a need. Even today, across the animal kingdom, hearts vary wildly. Some insects have hearts that run the length of their bodies, pulsing in waves. Octopuses have 3 hearts, 2 to move blood past the gills, 1 to circulate it to the body. Whales have hearts the size of bathtubs, slow and powerful. Hummingbirds have hearts that beat over 1,000 times a minute, a blur of persistence, and all of them, no matter their size or shape or speed, are descendants of that first ripple. That ancient idea that movement within could support movement without. And for creatures that had no words, no thoughts as we know them, what did that rhythm feel like? Was it sensation or simply necessity? Did it comfort? Did it guide? We can never know, but we do know that the moment a heart began to beat, the body became a system, not just a sack of cells. It became organized, coordinated, alive in a deeper way. The heartbeat did not just support life, it became its signature. The emergence of the heart was not a climax, but a beginning. It marked a turning inward, a new kind of complexity. The body no longer waited passively for the world to feed it. It reached, it pushed, it pulsed. It became its own engine, its own tide. And in that movement was a declaration: I am not just here, I am beating, I am active, I am alive. And that pulse, once begun, never truly stopped. It passed from trilobite to fish, from fish to amphibian, from reptile to mammal. It adapted, branched, changed its pace, but it remained. Inside every animal that moves there is a rhythm, a memory, a murmur of ancient oceans and crawling silence, a pattern that began in the soft muscle of a forgotten creature and now continues in the chest of a bird in flight, in a fox at rest, in you, reading this, breathing without trying. The first heartbeat did not make a sound, it did not echo, but it mattered, because from that soundless contraction, life found a way to go farther, last longer, feel more. Let us now follow that first quiet heartbeat as it flows forward through time, from the simple pulsing tubes of early animals to the intricate rhythms that sustain the creatures of today. For as bodies changed, as ecosystems became denser and behaviours more complex, the demands placed upon the heart multiplied. What once was enough for drifting in calm waters now had to support bursts of motion, deeper dives, colder temperatures, greater distances. And so, slowly, patiently, evolution refined the heart, not in grand leaps, but in quiet calibrations. New chambers formed, valves emerged to prevent backflow, walls thickened, muscles strengthened. The heart became not only more powerful but more precise. It learned to coordinate its beat with breath, with activity, with rest. And in doing so, it allowed life to expand, to run, to leap, to fly. In fish, the heart remained simple but effective. A single loop sent blood from the heart to the gills, where it picked up oxygen, then onto the body. This worked well in water, where buoyancy and temperature are steady. But as some animals began to explore land, circulation had to adapt. Gravity posed new challenges. Air offered more oxygen, but dried tissues quickly. Amphibians, bridging the divide between sea and shore, developed a 3-chambered heart, 2 atria and 1 ventricle. This allowed for partial separation of oxygen-rich and oxygen-poor blood. It was not perfect, but it was progress. Blood could now loop more efficiently, serving lungs and body with greater control. Then came the reptiles, and later the birds and mammals. Their hearts gained a fourth chamber, dividing oxygenated and deoxygenated blood completely. This allowed for higher pressures, faster flow, better delivery. It supported warm-bloodedness, an internal furnace powered by constant efficient circulation. Now the body could maintain temperature, fuel long-distance motion, and support larger, more demanding brains. The heart had become a masterwork, small, contained, but tirelessly capable. And though its form had changed across lineages, its essence remained. Contraction and release, sending life where it needed to go. But the heart did more than move blood. It moved signals. Hormones released into the bloodstream travelled from one organ to another, delivering messages of stress or calm, hunger or fullness, growth or repair. The circulatory system powered by the heart became the body's communication network. Not as fast as nerves, but broader, more enduring. Through it, the body spoke to itself, and the heart, though silent, was the voice that sent the message forward. Even the brain, often seen as the seat of thought and self, depends utterly on the heart. A moment without circulation starves neurons of oxygen, halting thought, memory, being. In this way, the brain rides upon the rhythm of the heart, a passenger on a vessel first crafted in the Cambrian silence. Across species, the heart responded not just to need, but to lifestyle. In hibernating animals, it slowed dramatically, preserving energy for months of stillness. In birds, it quickened to support high metabolism, allowing for long migrations and bursts of flight. In the blue whale, the largest heart in the animal kingdom beat slowly, with deep, deliberate strength, pushing blood across vast bodies. In tiny shrews, the heart races like a hummingbird's wings, sustaining lives that flicker fast and burn hot. Each heart, large or small, is tailored not only to size but to purpose. Evolution writes in rhythm, and the heart is its metronome. Even in the embryo, the heart is among the first organs to form and function. Before the brain thinks, before the limbs twitch, the heart beats. It begins as a simple tube, just as it did in ancient animals, then loops, folds, chambers, becomes more complex. But that early beat, that first flicker, is a direct link to our past. A whisper from ancestors who once glided through shallow seas, whose simple pulses paved the way for ours. In every vertebrate embryo that story repeats. The heart begins as it once did in the distant ocean, and only later becomes what it must be for life on land. Our cultural understanding of the heart has also evolved. Across civilizations, the heart has become a symbol of emotion, of courage, of truth. It is spoken of as the place where love resides, where character is held, where decisions are weighed. We say someone has a big heart or a heavy heart. We listen to our hearts, and while these are metaphors, they are rooted in something real. We feel in the chest what stirs the mind. Anxiety quickens the pulse, calm slows it, joy lifts it, grief presses it down. The heart responds not only to biology, but to experience. It is a barometer of our inner weather, measuring not just effort but emotion. Some scientists have explored the idea that the heart and brain are in constant dialogue, not just through biology but through rhythm. Heart rate variability, a measure of how the interval between heartbeats changes, is linked to emotional regulation, resilience, and well-being. When we breathe slowly, the heart settles. When we meditate, its rhythm becomes smooth, almost musical. The same organ that once evolved to pump nutrients through jellyfish and worms is now an anchor in the modern storm. In stillness, we return to its pace. In chaos, we seek its steadiness. The design of the heart is simple and complex at once. 4 chambers, valves to guide direction, a node to keep time, yet its function touches every cell. It carries oxygen to the fingertips, nutrients to the brain, hormones to the skin, and it does so with grace. Every beat a wave, every wave a promise. Over a lifetime, it will beat more than 2 billion times, without rest, without thanks. It does not pause for pain or for thought. It beats because it must, because life requires movement. And though hearts differ across species, the core remains the same, a centre of motion, a keeper of flow. Whether slow or fast, single-chambered or 4-chambered, it is the symbol of persistence. And in that persistence lies beauty. Not the kind we see, but the kind we feel. The comfort of continuity. The assurance that even in sleep, even in sorrow, the rhythm remains. So when we place a hand over our chest and feel the quiet thump beneath, we are not just feeling a biological function. We are touching time. We are hearing an echo from the first animals who dared to grow, to move, to need. We are witnessing the survival of a pattern born in the sea, carried through ages, still working, still whispering. It says, "You're here, you're alive, keep going." Let us now draw near to the end of the journey of that first heartbeat. Not an ending in silence, but a continuation carried forward in every breath, every motion, every creature that ever lived and lives still. For the heart, though it began as a simple contraction, became much more than a pump. It became a rhythm keeper for the entire body, a quiet conductor orchestrating the pulses of life. And across the branches of evolution, this conductor took many forms, yet always carried the same mission: sustain, nourish, endure. The beating heart is not just a symbol, it is a legacy. Every thump is an inheritance from a lineage that reaches deep into the ancient oceans and forward through every living spine, into the future. In mammals, including ourselves, the heart became astonishingly efficient. 4 chambers, each with its task. Oxygenated blood enters from the lungs, is pumped out to the body. Deoxygenated blood returns, is sent back to the lungs. This closed circuit hums along with no command from the mind. It is automatic, intrinsic. The pacemaker cells fire with their own rhythm, their dance of ions setting off wave after wave of muscular contractions. Calcium, potassium, sodium, all moving in and out, choreographing a beat that never needed to be taught. This silent schooling of cells, perfected by millions of years of quiet trial, keeps us alive even as we sleep, even as we forget it's there. But the heart is not just mechanical. It adapts, it learns, it responds. When we climb, it quickens. When we grieve, it pounds. When we rest, it softens. It listens to signals from the brain, from hormones, from breath. It adjusts moment by moment. No other organ holds us with such constancy and flexibility. It is the one part of us that in its work is never still. From our first weeks in the womb until our last hour on earth, it does not cease. It cannot, and yet it rarely asks for recognition. We do not sense each contraction. We do not command it, but we trust it. We must. And what of the hearts of others? In bats, the heart must support flight, an act that demands incredible energy. Their hearts beat hundreds of times a minute, feeding muscles that never rest in the air. In crocodiles, the heart holds a unique trick, a bypass valve that lets them direct blood away from the lungs while underwater, conserving oxygen, surviving in stillness. In deep-diving whales, the heart slows dramatically, conserving energy for long descents into crushing depths. In frogs, the heart adjusts between air and water, switching flow depending on where the body draws breath. Each heart in each creature is an answer to a question. How do you live here in this form, in this place? Even beyond animals, the idea of circulation appears. Plants do not have hearts, but they have flow. Sap rising, nutrient cycling, a pulse of water drawn upward through xylem by sunlight and evaporation. Fungi share resources through vast underground networks. The earth itself circulates air and ocean in patterns not unlike breath. And though none of these are hearts, they echo that first idea: movement sustains life. Stillness in time invites decay. It is the heartbeat of the planet, not felt through chest or wrist, but through season and storm and the slow turning of continents. We often think of progress as noise, more energy, more speed, more volume. But the heart teaches something different. It teaches constancy, patience, presence. It does not rush, it does not shout. It repeats gently with devotion. Even as we age, even as our bodies tire, the heart remains steady. A companion, a reminder, a keeper of promises written long before we were born. In medicine, we have come to know the heart deeply. We listen to it with stethoscopes. We record its patterns in waves and charts. We mend it when it falters, restart it when it stalls. We transplant it, even carry mechanical versions in machines. And yet, even as we understand its mechanics, we continue to speak of it in metaphor. We say someone is kind-hearted, or broken-hearted, or has a change of heart. Because even though the brain holds our thoughts, it is the heart that seems to carry our being. It is in the chest that we feel the tremble of fear, the warmth of love, the ache of absence. Perhaps this is not just poetry. Perhaps the body knows that this quiet organ is more than tissue. Perhaps the pulsing muscle, born from ancient need, deserves its place as the centre of our metaphors. It is where all journeys begin, not in steps, but in beats. It is how the body says yes to life over and over again. With each contraction, it agrees to stay, to try, to continue. In some animals, the heart can stop and start again. Certain turtles frozen in winter allow their hearts to cease, only to resume with spring. Some fish slow their hearts to near stillness in cold depths. This adaptability speaks not only to survival but to resilience. The heart, though vulnerable, is also enduring. It recovers, it adapts, it persists, and through this, it teaches us one of life's softest truths. That strength is not always speed or volume. Sometimes it is repetition, a quiet rhythm that refuses to break. So now, as we close this story, return for a moment to that first pulsing tube in the body of a soft sea creature, unseen by fossil or memory, but present. Let it become clear in your mind. Let its beat sound softly. Thump, thump, thump. It was not special then. It did not know what it would become, but it beat anyway. And from that beat came motion, from motion survival, from survival generations, from generations wings and hands and voices and dreams. And now in you that same rhythm continues. Different in form, but identical in spirit. A heartbeat born before language, before thought, still singing through your chest. A reminder that you are part of something old, something ongoing. That deep in your body, something ancient whispers forward. You live, you move, you pulse. You are part of the same rhythm that stirred the first animal to life. Not by accident, but by necessity. Not by noise, but by pattern. Not by force, but by flow. And if you listen, truly listen, you can hear it. The original rhythm, the one that never needed words, the pulse of the first heartbeat.